Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. This is a response to a members community question. This is how this tutorial started. So what happened, I sent them this link to this image classification with Django and TensorFlow. And then a bit later on, I had a look at this tutorial and I realized that it's just not going to work. So I thought I'll make a tutorial which is based or originated from this tutorial on how to set up, like they've done here, TensorFlow, Django, image classification in a really kind of simplistic way. It was a really good inspiration because there's lots of new things to learn here, even though we're just going to go through TensorFlow in a really kind of basic way. Here, for example, TensorFlow, we can't utilize Python 3.9, not at least with TensorFlow 2.0. So we have to use a different version of Python. So this is a good opportunity to show you a really crude way of installing different versions of Python on Windows, very crude way, and then utilize that for our virtual environment, not environment, I need an N there, environment. So once we've done all that, we'll go through installing dependencies for TensorFlow, we'll set it all up in a really simple Django application, and then this also gives us a quick view of managing files from a form. So there's a number of ways we could manage files from a form. So we'll just go through how we can maybe collect that image from the form and then maybe perform some actions on it. Okay, so I hope that's super clear what's going to go on here. I don't want you to invest your time into something that you don't need to or don't want to learn. So let's get started. So just for those who need further classification on what exactly we're going to do here, you can see this is a kind of final product. There's no polish here. It's going to be a simple form. You're going to choose a file. So once you've done all that, you can upload, and then it's going to produce a string similar to this. And you can see here that this has been classified as a tiger cat, this image. It is a picture of a cat, so you've got some weights here also. Now I haven't gone the extra step of extracting this and make it into a nice list, etc. But you can clearly see the data that's being returned. The image is being classified, in this case, as a tiger cat. I guess that's 73%, Egyptian cat, tabby, and so on. So that's the image classification that we're going to build. So the first step here then, we're going to need to install a different version of Python. So on my machine here, let's just take a look in the command prompt. I'm just going to type in Python --version. I think I've got 3.9 installed. So I want to now install a different version of Python. So like I said, I'm just going to show you kind of a crude version to get this working with a different version of Python. Now, if you do want me to show you a much more advanced tutorial, I say advanced, a different tutorial on how to maybe more effectively manage different versions of Windows, please let me know. If there's enough of you, I can definitely make that. That's not a problem. So all we need to do is go over to python.org, and then we just need to select from the downloads, in this case Windows, the different version that we want to download. So let's go to all releases, sorry. So here we want to potentially install 3.8. So here's 3.8, 3.8.8. So just go ahead and download that. Just make sure you're downloading the correct version for your operating system. So Windows users, it talks about that. So this is the Windows installer here. So just go ahead and download that. So as you go through the installation, the advanced option, what you want to do is customize the install location. So you can see here that I put all my Python versions on the C drive. So I've got a folder for Python 3.9, which is a Python 3.9/ folder. So here I'm going to create a new folder on my C drive and install this onto Python in the Python 3.8 folder. So here you go. You can see on my C drive, I've got a folder called Python 3.9 and Python 3.8. So what I want to do here is when I create a new virtual machine, I basically just want to select the Python exe from this folder instead of utilizing the default, which is set up Python 3.9. Now I don't want to start changing kind of the environment variables at this point. I could do, like I said, we can go through those type of processes, but it's just easier and quicker to begin with, at least. If you know you're not going to use this a lot, then just basically start in your virtual machine using the Python exe that's inside of this folder. And that will then create a new environment with Python 3.8 instead of using Python 3.9. So to give you an example here, let's just open up the Visual Studio. Let's just change directory to C. Change directory to C. Sorry, and then let's change the directory to our new Python folder. So Python 3.8. And inside of here, if I were to do dir, you can see that I've got a file here called Python WEXE. Python exe right here. So what I can do here is I can just use that. And then there are other ways of doing this, of course. This, in my opinion, is an easy way of doing this. So what I can now do is just basically make a new folder for my virtual environment. So remember, to make a virtual environment, we're going to use the M switch, virtual environment, and then you just need to specify where you want the virtual environment to be placed. So let's just go back a folder, .. So at the moment we're in this Python folder. So I'm going to move back one folder, .. into C drive, and then I'm going to make a new folder called C, and then I'm going to put the virtual environment there. So that's going to make a new virtual environment utilizing Python 3.8. Okay, so once that's done, I can then just change the directory again. Let's go back. Let's change directory. I've got a new directory called C. So let's have a look inside of there now. You can see I've got my vent folder. So let's change the directory into there. Oh, there we go. Oh, no, we didn't do that. Change directory. Let's come back out again. We're already inside of a directory that we need to. So what I can now do is obviously activate as per normal. So go in and activate. So I've activated my virtual machine now, and I can just carry on as normal. So pip install. Or let's do a Python version, shall we? You can see I'm using Python 3.8. So let's do pip install Django. Once Django is installed, of course, we'll use the Django admin to start our project. So we're just going to call this core. Now in this project, I'm going to put everything inside of this folder, just as kind of a simple example. So I won't make a different application. I'll put everything in core. Now normally, obviously, you'd probably want to make different applications for your application in general. But here we're just going to use the core folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So don't forget the dot for the folder to appear right here. So actually, let's just create or open the folder that we need. So see this folder. So I just selected the folder. So I've still got the virtual machine working. Right, okay, so that's the folder I've just created. So now we can go ahead and build this up. So let's start off by installing, pip install. Let's install TensorFlow. That'll take a couple of seconds. So at this point, if TensorFlow isn't installing, it's likely potentially that you're still running Python 3.9 or a version that isn't compatible. And it will, let's remember that when you try to run these packages, it will try and determine what version of Python you have, for example. So it will then determine whether it can be installed or not, for example. So that seems okay. So now TensorFlow is installed. Let's go into our settings and let's start bringing in some of our code. So in our settings file, we're going to import TensorFlow into our project, and then we go ahead and we're going to need a few other tools. So here we're going to be utilizing VGG16. So this is a pre-trained model that we're going to utilize and incorporate. So when the project loads up, it's going to need to download that, and that's a fairly big download. I think it's around about 512 meg. If you head over to the Keras website here, you can see that there's a number of different available models. We're using VG16 here, 528 meg. The amount of parameters and depth, etc. it has. There's a few different models here that you can utilize and then bring into your project. So by all means, have a look at those if you want to kind of expand or try out some different models. So here we're going to be utilizing some tools from TensorFlow 1. And that's these sessions. So with TensorFlow 2.0, it won't be compatible with utilizing sessions, and it's recommended to upgrade them. Now, I haven't got to that point yet, reading through all the documentation to upgrade the sessions in 2.0. If you are aware and you can suggest the code that's needed to do that, then please do in the comments and I'll make those changes. So we're going to press ahead using sessions here. So we're going to need this compatibility kind of mode here. So tensorflow.compat.v1 as TF. So we're bringing that in for kind of compatibility. And those are the imports that we're going to need. So if you're not familiar with sessions, TensorFlow have got some great documentation, of course. So have a look at session. So here, for example, class running TensorFlow operations. So you can see we're utilizing that compatibility mode to create a session. A session object encapsulates the environment in which the operation objects are executed. Okay, so have a look at the documentation if you want to read a little bit more. So if we're back with compatibility, we also have the disable v2 behavior. So we can go ahead and do that. Right, so with these sessions, we're going to need to utilize sessions like to perform the operation. So we're going to need to create a variable for sessions. So let's go ahead and do that. So we create this new variable we're going to utilize when we make the classification. And then we're going to also utilize the get default graph. Again, documentation, get default graph, returns the default graph for the current thread. So then we go ahead and set the global TensorFlow session. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. So we've got this global session. Right. There we go. So that's pretty much all the code we need. The last component here is we're going to need our pre-trained model. So let's bring that in. There we go. And then finally, let's go ahead and pip install Keras. Right, so now we're probably ready to py manage by run server. So you can see that this will probably take a while. But once it's all done, it's ready. You can see that the server is running. So we're now ready to kind of hook this into our application. So let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to call this views.py. So I'm going to be working here in core. It might seem pretty strange if you've been utilizing Django for a little while and we've been utilizing or building applications. So we're just going to work here just for manageability for no particular other reason. We're just going to work inside the core here. We're going to need a template. So let's just create our templates folder. And inside of here, we'll create a new file called index. So that's the page that's going to show the form to allow us to upload the image and then see the results. Right, so I'll just take you through the dependencies here. So we're going to need numpy here. So manage or to convert our image into a format that's going to be then compatible to run against our model. So we've got these importing these settings from Django. So this is settings as in the settings file. So this is going to give us access to these variables, the variables that we set up here. So we can run our classification. Next up, we have the default storage. So I'll just take you through this shortly, but what we're going to do is we're going to capture the image from the form and then perform some operations on it. And one thing that we're going to need is the default storage, and we'll set this up shortly. Now, if you're familiar with Django, you know that the default storage typically is a folder, which we build right now, called media on the root. So not in core, it needs to be on the root. So the images normally then, the folder that we store the images is normally called media, and that's can be the default or the root. So obviously we can change this in settings. We'll set this up shortly, but we're going to need a folder called media to store our images. So we then have render. So let's remember this is a Django tool that will then return a HTTP response to the browser, the user's browser. We've got the VGG16. So again, this is just about preparing the image. We need this to prepare the image to be classified. And then we've also got decode predictions. So once we've got the predictions, we'll return that and then we decode those into what essentially will be a string that we output, like you saw in the preview, to the browser. Then these are tools here. So image to array. So you can see what's going to be happening here. We take in our image. We convert into a format that's then going to be compatible to run our classification. And then finally, we've got the set session. So I guess to be more specific here about what a session is doing, a session allows us to execute graphs or parts of graphs. Okay, so it's going to, for example, allocate resources on our machine so that we can hold the values of the results and maybe any variables. So that's why we're setting up the session, and then essentially then we're going to then pass that back and decode the prediction. So now we're going to need a function. So this is going to take in the request from the browser and then perform an action. So we're going to be using a form. So we're posting data to this view. Therefore, we need to just check to make sure that the request from the browser, the method was a post. So if it was, we're then going to perform an action. That action is going to be, obviously, we're going to do the classification. Else, we're just going to return the template. Because remember, what we have on the template, what we will have on the template, sorry, is just the form and then what the output prediction will be. So if, for example, we go to the page and we haven't got there via post, then it's just going to show the form. If, for example, we do send a post to this function, then we're going to run the prediction. Okay, so now we just need to ask ourselves, imagine we press the button on the form to submit our image. We now send it across to this view here, this function, sorry. We've checked to see if the method was post. It was. Now we need to do something. So what we're going to do first is take the file. So we're going to get the file. So from request, inside of here is all the kind of information from the form that's been sent across. We're going to go in and have a look for files, and we're then going to get the image file. So that will all be lined up to the form shortly. So we're going to grab the image from the form, and then we're going to store it in this variable called file. And then what we want to do is utilize this default storage. So Django provides this default storage, and there's a few different options here we can utilize from this. Here we're utilizing save. So what we're going to do here is save the image to the default storage, which is going to be this folder called media, which we need to set up. And then we just define two things here, for example, the name and the actual file we want to store. So there's two parameters. So notice we get the name from the file, so file.name. So we grab the file here. So the parameter from there is the name. And then we save that into this new variable called file name. So at this point, the image has been saved to our folder, or would have been saved. So what we're going to need to do now, for example, is get the URL so that we can pass it over so it can then be classified. So here we've created this new variable called file URL, and we're going to use the default storage again and the path to get the file. So here we get the default storage.path. That's going to produce whatever the default storage is of Django that we've set up. So that typically will be the media folder, which we'll define in a second. So we get that parameter, and then we get the file. Remember, the file name is already saved here in the previous variable here. So we get that, and then we make a match. So we get the file URL, including the file name, and then, sorry, it doesn't make a match. Apologies. So file name just gets extended onto the path, and then we can then return that back as a full path to that image. So let's go ahead and just set up this media here. So let's go into our settings. Now, typically at the bottom of the settings here, we would define a few things. So you can see we've got this static URL, if you know what that is. If not, it doesn't matter at this point. And then what we're going to do is set up two variables. We can do this two ways. I'm going to do this the pre-Django 3.1 way, utilizing the OS path join. So it's just a safer way of working at the moment, because I realize that some people are still getting errors if they utilize the kind of a new method of just using the base directory variable. So because we're using OS is a built-in Python library, so we're going to need to bring that in. Just import OS. That allows Python to kind of manipulate or read the operating system's path In this case, what we're doing is we're getting the base directory of our project here, connecting it to the media folder, and essentially then it's directing Django to this folder right here. We also use the media URL to define, for example, in our browser, where the images are set. So we set essentially a URL to our image folder. Right, so there's two things here, the media root and the media URL. Okay, so in addition to that, because we're working in a development environment, we also have to kind of set up a URL for this. So head over to the URLs. There's two settings that we're going to need here. One is the import settings, and the other is the URL static, import static. And that's basically just going to allow us then to set our URL if we need it to our media URL. Excuse me. There we go. So that's just going to add a new URL that's going to basically allow access to our media URL while we're in development mode. And you can see here document root equals settings.media root. Okay, so that sets up and allows then access to that folder. So at this point, what we can do is we can just test this out, because if this doesn't work, then there's no point continuing at this point. So let's go ahead and go into our index page, and we're going to build a very simple form that's going to allow us to submit an image. So go ahead and create a new form. Here we've got the encryption type multi-part form data. So there's going to be different types of data inside of this form potentially. And then we've got the predictions. So basically we're either going to show the form and predictions, or we're going to just show the form. So if there's no predictions, that won't get shown. So this is a variable that we're going to pass across to our index page, which is going to have all the predictions. So we're going to send this form using the post method. So we define that too. And then we go ahead and we're going to need a CSRF token to send that across. So just a little bit of security there. And then we've got two inputs, or one input, sorry, which is going to be the file. So input type file, name is the image file. So if you remember here in line 15, at the moment, the file, we extract that image given the name that's in the input there. So image file needs to match up here with the name here, image file. And then we've also got a new input, which is the submit, and that's going to have a value of upload. So that's just going to submit. Where are we going to submit? Well, in this case, because we haven't defined where we want to post this, it's just going to kind of essentially refresh the page and then reload this view and then capture the post request, or the post request. Okay. So let's go ahead now and just make sure the server's started. Okay, let's run the server. Okay, so it's started okay. It takes a few seconds. Let's go back. Page not found. Okay, so one thing that we've forgotten to do is to set up the URL for this. So at the moment, Django doesn't know that URL. So in the URLs here, you can see there's only one set. So when the request gets sent to Django, the request gets read. What page do you actually want? At the moment, there's no path for it. So let's go ahead and just add a new path. Now we created a new, let's just do this menu quickly. So we want to use the home page. So there's no parameters there. So just blank. So that's going to be the home page. And then we want to bring in our views. We need to set that in a minute. And it's the view's called index. And then we give this a name equals homepage or image classification, or just home. Okay, just home. Sorry. So let's bring that in. So from dot import views. So let's bring our views in. So we're just kind of connecting up our views. So we have access to our views, our index view. So let's just double check our view's called index. Yep. Okay, so that hooks up to our view. We're going to need a comma here. Don't forget after each line. There we go. So now when we go back and refresh, we should see this. A template does not exist. Okay, so let's have a look at why that is. So if you are having problems like this, what you can do is go into the settings and have a look at line 61 here, directory. So here we can actually specify the template directory. So we can do that by just, maybe let's just bring out the template folder. I'm going to move the template folder out of our project. So this is what it looks like. And then we're just going to define this folder and where this template is. And Django will then look for this folder and then the file inside of it and make the match. So if it matches our index here, it will show the file. Okay, so what we can do here is just add in OS path join. We've got the base directory variable that's set at the top of this page, settings page, and the folder called templates, and our templates are inside of there. So we don't need that comma. So there we go. So that's now set. Now there's a few ways of doing that, of course. I'm just showing you pretty much the pre-Django 3.1 way. You may have this problem still, and I have a few students who, using the same machines, doing exactly the same things. Sometimes it doesn't work for some reason. Sometimes it does. So it should pick up templates from our folder here, in a templates folder, typically within an application. But this provides us a great opportunity to set that. So let's go back now, start the server, and then refresh. And now we can choose a file. So let's go ahead and choose a file. So I've chosen a file here. It's called pic.jpg. It's an image of a cat. So I'm going to upload that. And here we get the response. So returned HTTP object, it returned none instead. The view, okay, didn't return a HTTP object. Okay, so let's go back into our code. So we didn't return an object. So if post, else. So what's happening here, you can see that this else here is connected to this return. Now, for example, if I don't make a post, so if I do make a post, you can see it's going to run this code and then it's just going to fall off. There's nothing else. Here, if I run an else, it will return the page. So that's why the page did load originally. So really what I need to do here is take this out and return regardless. So let's just give that a go. Try that again. And there we go. So it's uploaded, it's refreshed and shown the page again. So now let's go into our media folder. You can now see I've got 2 images inside of it. So it did upload the first one in actual fact. There was just an error with the template returning that template. So you can see that the images are now being uploaded to this folder here. So let's go to the next step now. So we now know the image is being uploaded. So now we can go ahead and can prepare the image ready for it to be classified. Let me just see if I can move this across a bit. Okay, so we get the image. So we use the load image. So here we're just preparing the image in preparation for it to be classified. So we use the image to array, and then we go ahead and further customize that array in preparation for it to be classified using the expand dims. Once that's done, we can then further prepare our image and then get it ready again to be processed. So I think here we've created an array from the image. We then further customized that array in preparation to be classified. And here what we're doing is encoding that data, again preparing it to be classified. So now we can go ahead to the next step, which is obviously running the classification and then finally returning. So let's now go ahead and create our predictions. So with settings.graph, now remember graph comes from our settings here. Okay, let's go back and then we're going to create our session and then run the predictions here. So the image model, that's our pre-created model. We're going to run against our image against. So that's what we brought in earlier. And then this is the processed image. So we prepared the image and finally got to this point, and now we can run the prediction. So that leaves us with the final step of outputting the data. So we decode the predictions. Now we can choose how many predictions here we want to return. I think 5 is default if you don't have this parameter here. So I've just selected 10. Now we can then return the render request is the index page, and then of course prediction, that's what we sent the data across as in the image, so predictions here. So we put all the data that's returned into label, and we put that into this context here that's then passed across and can be then utilized to render on the page. So with all that in place, let's go ahead and have a look. Let's just make sure the server's on. Let's choose a new file. Once you've chosen a file, upload, and we've got a problem. So the use of load image requires pill. So the most likely problem here is that pillow is not installed. So let's go ahead and pip install pillow just in case. There we go. So let's just try this again. The wait. Okay. So let's just go back, try again, and there we go. So if you didn't know what pillow was, it's a Python image library that is a very general and common tool that's utilized when we're dealing with or working with images in Django. So of course, now you have the data, you can go ahead and potentially convert this into a nice array and loop out just the individual components that you want to display on the page and so on. So there we go. That's towards Django TensorFlow image classification. Like I said, if you do know how to get rid of those sessions so that we can fully upgrade that to 2.0, that would be really useful. Here was a simple example of utilizing different Python versions in Windows. We then created the virtual environment in 3.8, and then we installed those dependencies, and there wasn't too much to do really. That model, that pre-created model, was and is a great way of working quickly to integrate machine learning into your application. You can see that we've got a useful image classification tool that you might want to integrate within your software. And then we looked at, very briefly, be it Django managing files from a form. Thank you. I hope there was some value there, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.